All right, so this unit, of course, we're still talking about quadratic equations, and we've talked about already solving quadratic equations. And we know that when we solve a quadratic equation, it means where does that parabola cross on that x-axis? So one way we looked at it was we graphed them, and then we just plotted those points. The quiz you just took was us solving them by factoring, and then taking those factors, setting them equal to 0, and then finding out where they cross the x-axis. This is it's just a different way that we can use to solve quadratics. And it is by the square root. So I'm going to show you that on our notes that we've already talked about in class. But of course, if I go too fast, shocking, you have this video to come back to. So quadratic equations of the form ax squared plus c equals 0, if they fit this form, then this is going to be the best method to solve that quadratic equation. Notice there is no linear. There is no bx term in here. It is just your quadratic term and your constant term. And if we have just a quadratic term and a constant term, then I can use this method. So our first step is we're going to isolate the x squared. So we're solving for x squared. And to do that, I'm going to add 49 on both sides. I get x squared equals 49. And then we're going to take the inverse of x squared. And what is that? It's just the square root. So we take the square root of both sides. The square root and the squared cancel out. We've already talked about that this year. And I'm left with x equals the square root of 49. Now, this is where you need to remember. You can have a negative root and you can have a positive root. So when you have square roots, there's going to be two answers here. It's going to be x equals positive 7 and x equals negative 7. And remember, because there are two answers in here, it's bracket form least to greatest. So negative 7 and 7. Because the square root of 49 can be a negative 7, because negative 7 times negative 7 is 49, or a positive 7. 7 times 7 is 49. Remember, I know that there are a possibility of two answers because it's the second degree. And remember, at the very beginning, we said that quadratic equations, because it's the second degree, has a possibility of two solutions. The parabola can hit that x-axis twice. The parabola can hit that x-axis once, where the vertex is on the x-axis, or it can hit it not at all, which means no solution. So remember, you have to have the positive and negative values. All right, so let's do a couple of these examples together. Let's start with number 3. Actually, no, let's start with number 1. So number 1, I'm going to add 16 to both sides, and I get x squared equals 16. Take the square root of both of those, and x equals negative 4 and positive 4, because it's plus or minus the square root of 16. Now, let's look at number 3. Right? Everybody's on number 3. So I subtract 25 to both sides, and I get x squared equals the square root of negative 25. Can I take, square root and square root. Can I take the square root of a negative number? No, I can't. So what is my answer? No solution. You cannot take the square root of a negative. So I want you to circle that one, because sometimes that can be tricky. All right, let's look at number 5. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. I get x squared equals 1, and then I take the square root, and x equals negative 1 and positive 1. It's plus or minus the square root of 1. All right, let's take a look at number 7. So if I want to isolate my x squared, the first thing I'm going to do is divide both sides by negative 2, and I get x squared equals 49. Now, inverse operation is taking the square root, so x equals plus or minus 49, which is really negative 7 and positive 7. Okay? So I know I'm going through these pretty fast, but we're just solving equations at this point. All right, let's take a look at number 9. My first step is add 108 to both sides. Additive inverse, and I get 3x squared equals 108. Divide both sides by 3. I get x squared equals 36. Take the square root, and I get x equals plus or minus the square root of 36. So x equals negative 6 and 6 with brackets, and for whatever reason it's not working. So x equals negative 6 and 6. All right. Hopefully that's just kind of review about how to solve equations. The only tricky part there is make sure that you cannot take the square root of a negative number, so watch out for that. Let's look down here. All right. This still fits the form, no linear term. I have a quadratic term and a constant term, so I'm still going to use that solving for squares. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and I get x squared equals 3. I take the square root, and watch, x equals plus or minus the square root of 3. So when you write your answer, I want these in simplified radical form. We've already simplified radical form, so if you forgot that, go back in your journal. Was it unit 6 maybe? Maybe it was unit 6, I can't remember. But I want you to go back and look at how we simplify those radicals. So here's how I want my answer. It's still 2 answers. Least to greatest, negative square roots of 3 and positive square roots of 3. That's how that answer is written. Let's take a look at number 19. Subtract 8 on both sides. I get x squared equals 48. Take the square root. So x equals plus or minus the square root of 48. We are going to simplify this by radical form. So remember how we did that. We took the tree, 2 and 24, 2 and 12, 2 and 6, 2 and 3. Remember doing this? And then I said underneath I have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. And it took a group of 2 to go outside. So this 2 goes outside and this 2 goes outside, which is 4 square roots of 3. So the simplified version of square root of 48 is 4 square roots of 3. But remember, it's negative 4 square roots of 3 and a positive 4 square roots of 3. So that's how I want your answer. I want you to circle that one because if you struggle with how to simplify radicals, you need to go back and look at that or come and see me in tutoring. So that's what that one's going to look like. We can take a look at number 21. I add 126 to both sides. 2x squared equals 126. Divide both sides by 2, and I get x squared equals 63. And then I take the square root, so I get x equals plus or minus the square root of 63. Keeping in mind that I have to simplify this. If you leave it in this form, it's not full credit. So how do you simplify 63? Remember, it's 9 and 7. Notice right here, 9 is a perfect square. So really, I can just say it's 3 square roots of 7 because I can't simplify 7 anymore. So that was our shortcut that we learned about. That's another way you could do it. So here, it's in bracket form. It's negative 3 square roots of 7 and positive 3 square roots of 7. Okay, so that's how we do the irrational solutions. And irrational, just remembers, doesn't fit the form A over B. It's not a perfect square. It's an irrational. All right, so good luck on that one.